Before Part 2 begins, remember where Part 1 ended. Cyrus the Great rose from a minor Persian tribe and built the largest empire the world had ever seen. He freed the Jews. He wrote the first Declaration of Human Rights. He conquered without burning. His successors Darius and Xerxes expanded that empire until it stretched from Greece to India. Persepolis, the most magnificent city on earth, rose from the Iranian plateau. For 200 years the Persian Empire was the center of the known world. Then Alexander the Great arrived. He burned Persepolis. He killed the last Achaemenid king. The world said it was over. But Iran had been here for 3,000 years. It did not end. It transformed. And that transformation begins now. Every empire that ever conquered Iran made the same mistake. They thought they had won. The Greeks came. The Arabs came. The Mongols came. Every single one of them conquered Iran. And every single one of them became Iranian. Iran does not resist its conquerors with armies alone. It resists them with civilization. With language. With poetry. With architecture. With a culture so deep and so old that it absorbs everything thrown at it and keeps moving. This is the story of how a civilization survives anything. This is Part 2. From the Arab conquest to Nader Shah. From the destruction of Baghdad to the beauty of Isfahan. 3,000 years, and counting. By 600 AD the Persian Empire was the Sasanian Empire, 300 years old, powerful, sophisticated. Its capital Ctesiphon on the Tigris River had a throne room with the largest brick arch ever built by human hands. But the Sasanians had been at war with the Byzantine Empire for decades. Both empires had bled each other white. The wars ended in 628 AD with no winner, just two exhausted giants leaning on each other across a ruined frontier. Then came the internal collapse. In the 20 years before the Arab invasion, Iran went through 12 different kings. Assassinations. Palace coups. Civil wars. The empire that had once made Rome tremble was tearing itself apart from within. The treasury was empty. The army was unpaid. The provinces were restless. A civilization that had ruled for 3 centuries was running on momentum alone. And momentum, eventually, runs out. The army that crossed into Iran in 636 AD looked nothing like a world-conquering force. They came from Arabia. They were few in number. Many were barefoot. They had no elephants, no siege engines, no armored cavalry. What they had was absolute certainty that God was with them. In just 10 years Islam had swept across Arabia and into Syria and Iraq. It moved not just as an army but as an idea, a powerful, egalitarian faith that offered dignity to the poor, the enslaved and the forgotten. People did not only fear it. Many welcomed it. The Arab general Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas led his forces toward the Sasanian heartland. The Persian commanders looked at the approaching army and were not afraid. They had faced Rome. They had faced Byzantium. What could these desert warriors possibly do? They were about to find out. The two forces met on the plains of Mesopotamia in 636 AD. The Persian general Rostam Farrukhzad commanded war elephants, armored cavalry, and veteran soldiers. Sa'd commanded men who believed they could not lose. The Battle of Al-Qadisiyah lasted 4 days. The Persian war elephants terrified the Arab horses on the first day. The Arabs adapted. They targeted the elephants' eyes and trunks with arrows. By day 2, the elephants were a liability, not an asset. On the third day a sandstorm blew into the Persian faces. The Arab soldiers used it as cover and pushed forward through the blinding dust. The Persian formations, drilled for set-piece battles against Rome, could not hold against fighters who used chaos as a weapon. On the fourth day, Rostam Farrukhzad was killed. His death broke the Persian line. The greatest army in the Middle East collapsed in hours. The road to the Sasanian capital Ctesiphon, and beyond it, to all of Iran, was open. When the Arabs entered Ctesiphon, they found the palace abandoned. The king had fled. The treasury was still full, the Sasanians had not even had time to take their gold. Arab soldiers who had never seen a city walked through halls of marble in silence. The last Sasanian king Yazdegerd III did not surrender. He ran. For 15 years he fled across his own empire, from province to province, always one step ahead of the Arab armies closing in behind him. His own nobles abandoned him. His own generals stopped answering his calls. City after city closed its gates, not to the Arabs, but to their own king. A ruler without loyalty is not a ruler. He is just a man on a horse going nowhere. In 651 AD, Yazdegerd was murdered near the city of Merv, not by Arabs, but by a local miller who wanted the coins in his pocket. The 300-year Sasanian Empire ended not with a battle. It ended with a fugitive king killed for pocket change. Here is what the history books miss. The Arab conquest was not a massacre. The Arabs came as conquerors, but Iran received them as a civilization that had been absorbing conquerors for 1,000 years. It knew exactly what to do. Within one generation, the Arab rulers needed Iranian administrators to run their empire. The Iranians had been administering empires for centuries. They stepped in. They wrote the letters. They managed the taxes. They kept the roads open. Quietly, the conquered were running things. Iranian architects built the mosques. Iranian poets wrote in Arabic and made Arabic poetry beautiful. Iranian musicians brought their instruments into the new Islamic courts. The conquerors provided the faith. The Iranians provided everything else. Two cultures were merging, but not equally. Persian was doing most of the work. The soul of the new Islamic civilization was being shaped by Iranian hands, Iranian minds, Iranian taste. The religion was Arab. The civilization was Persian. In 750 AD a revolution broke out. And it started not in Arabia, but in the Iranian province of Khorasan. The Umayyad Caliphate, the Arab dynasty that had ruled Islam since the conquest, was about to be overthrown. By Iranians. The Abbasid revolution swept westward from Khorasan like a wave. Its soldiers were Iranian. Its generals were Iranian. Its propaganda spoke of justice and equality for all Muslims, not just Arabs. Within 2 years the Umayyads were gone. The new Abbasid rulers made a decision that changed history. They moved the capital of the Islamic world away from Damascus, an Arab city, and built a brand new capital on the banks of the Tigris River in the heart of ancient Persian territory. They called it Baghdad. Baghdad was built in a perfect circle, a design taken directly from Sasanian Persian urban planning. The Abbasid caliphs wore Persian-style robes. They adopted Persian court ceremonies. They married Iranian women. 100 years after the conquest, the capital of the Islamic world looked and felt Persian. Baghdad in the 9th century was the most extraordinary city on earth. At its peak it held perhaps 1 million people, the largest city in the world outside of China. Its market sold goods from Spain to India. Its streets were lit at night. Nothing like it existed anywhere in Europe. It had hospitals where doctors performed surgeries and kept patient records. It had pharmacies. It had an astronomical observatory. It had public baths, schools, and libraries holding hundreds of thousands of books. Europeans visiting Baghdad in this era described it as something from another world. At the heart of Baghdad was the House of Wisdom, Beit al-Hikmah. It was part library, part university, part research center. Scholars were brought from across the world, Christian, Jewish, Zoroastrian, Muslim, to translate every book of knowledge into Arabic, Greek, Persian, Indian, Chinese, everything. The driving force behind all of this was Iranian. Iranian scholars, Iranian administrators, Iranian architects. The great Barmakid family, Iranian viziers who served the Abbasid caliphs, personally funded translations, built libraries, and recruited scholars from across Asia. Baghdad was an Iranian project wearing an Arab crown. The House of Wisdom at its peak held over 400,000 manuscripts. It contained the entire surviving knowledge of ancient Greece. Original Persian astronomical texts going back 1,000 years. Indian mathematical works that had never been seen outside India. It was the greatest concentration of human knowledge ever assembled in one place. Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi was born in Khorasan, the Iranian province that had launched the Abbasid revolution. He worked in the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. And he invented algebra. The word algebra comes directly from the title of his book, Al-Kitab al-Muqtaza fi Hisab al-Jabr. The word algorithm, the foundation of every computer program ever written, comes from his name. Al-Khwarizmi. Latinized by medieval European scholars into algorithmus. Without this one Iranian mathematician, there are no computers. No smartphones. No internet. No modern world as we know it. He also introduced the Hindu-Arabic numeral system to the Islamic world, the numbers 1 through 9 and the concept of zero. Before this, Europeans were doing mathematics in Roman numerals. Try multiplying mukmuks by XLVI. Al-Khwarizmi made that problem simple. Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, was born in 980 AD in the Iranian city of Bukhara. By age 10 he had memorized the Quran. By 16 he was treating patients. By 18 the Sultan of Bukhara called him to cure an illness no other physician could treat. He succeeded. He wrote the Canon of Medicine, 5 volumes covering every known disease, drug and surgical procedure. It was so comprehensive, so logical, so ahead of its time that European universities made it their primary medical textbook. They used it for 600 years. 600 years. Avicenna also wrote on philosophy, astronomy, chemistry, geology, and psychology. He produced over 450 works in his lifetime. He died in 1037 at around 57 years old, having changed the direction of medicine, science, and philosophy across 3 continents. Al-Biruni was born in 973 AD in what is now Uzbekistan, then the heart of the Iranian cultural world. He calculated the radius of the Earth with stunning accuracy using nothing but a mountain, a protractor, and mathematics. His answer was within 1% of the correct figure. He described the possibility of the Earth rotating around the Sun 500 years before Copernicus published his heliocentric model. His book on India is still considered one of the greatest works of comparative anthropology ever written. He did all of this without a single modern instrument. Al-Biruni spoke Persian, Arabic, Sanskrit, Greek, Hebrew, and Syriac. He studied Hindu philosophy, Buddhist thought, and Christian theology with equal curiosity and equal respect. In an age of rigid religious boundaries, he crossed every one of them in pursuit of knowledge. While Iranian scientists were changing the world, an Iranian poet was fighting a different battle. By the 10th century, Arabic had become the language of power and scholarship across the Islamic world. Persian was fading. Children were growing up speaking Farsi at home but writing Arabic at school. Ferdowsi was born around 940 AD in Khorasan. He saw what was happening to his language and made a decision. He would write an epic poem, entirely in Persian, that would tell the entire history and mythology of Iran from the creation of the world to the Arab conquest. It took him 30 years. The result was the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, 60,000 verses of Persian poetry using almost no Arabic words. Deliberately. Defiantly. It was an act of cultural warfare disguised as literature. The Shahnameh worked. Persian survived. Every Iranian child who has ever spoken Farsi, across 15 centuries, owes something to this one stubborn poet who spent 30 years refusing to let his language die. Today the Shahnameh is still read, still memorized, still loved. Rumi was born in 1207 in Balkh, in what is now Afghanistan. He became the greatest mystical poet in human history. His Masnavi, 6 volumes of poetry on love, God and the human soul, has never gone out of print in 800 years. Today Rumi is the best-selling poet in the United States. A 13th-century Iranian mystic, outselling every living poet in the most powerful country on earth. Persian poetry does not age. It simply waits for the world to catch up. Hafez was born in Shiraz around 1315. He became the master of the ghazal, lyric poems about love, wine, and the divine. His divan sits in nearly every Iranian home today. Iranians open it at random and read whatever page appears, treating it as an oracle, a guide, a friend. Omar Khayyam was born in Nishapur in 1048. He calculated the solar year more accurately than the Gregorian calendar used today. He was also a poet. His Rubaiyat, translated into English in 1859, became one of the most read poems in the English language. A medieval Iranian mathematician writing poetry in his spare time, and the world never forgot him. In 1206 a boy named Temujin united the Mongol tribes of the Asian steppe and gave himself a new name, Genghis Khan. Universal ruler. He built the largest land empire in human history. His armies did not just conquer. They erased. The Mongols reached Iran in the 1220s. What they did there was not conquest. It was extinction. City after city was destroyed completely. Every person killed. Every building burned. Every field salted. Travelers passing through years later reported nothing but bones as far as the eye could see. The city of Merv, one of the largest cities in the world, home to perhaps 500,000 people, was destroyed in 1221. Every single person was killed. The Mongols spent a week counting the dead to make sure no one had hidden. They counted 1.3 million bodies. The Qanats, ancient underground water channels that had irrigated Iran for 3,000 years, were smashed. The Mongols did not understand agriculture. They were nomads. They saw irrigation infrastructure as obstacles and destroyed it. Fields that had been farmed since before Cyrus turned to desert within a generation. Historians estimate Iran's population dropped by 75% during the Mongol invasions. 3 out of every 4 Iranians are dead. Cities that had stood for 1,000 years, rubble. It was not just a military defeat. It was the near-total destruction of a civilization. In 1258 the Mongols reached Baghdad. Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis, gave the Caliph one chance to surrender. The Caliph refused. On the 13th of February 1258 the walls broke. What followed was one of the greatest catastrophes in human history. The House of Wisdom was destroyed. Books beyond counting were thrown into the Tigris River. Eyewitnesses reported the water ran black with ink for days. Centuries of translated knowledge, Greek, Persian, Indian, Chinese, gone. We will never know what was in those books. The Caliph was captured. The Mongols had a superstition: royal blood must not touch the ground. So they wrapped al-Mustasim in a carpet and had horses trample him to death. The 500-year Abbasid Caliphate and the Islamic Golden Age ended on the streets of Baghdad wrapped in a rug. Some historians argue the world has never fully recovered from what was lost in Baghdad in 1258. The Renaissance in Europe drew from the scraps that survived. Imagine what it could have drawn from if Baghdad had not burned. We are living in the shadow of that loss right now. And then, Iran did it again. The Mongol rulers of Iran, the Ilkhanate, converted to Islam within 50 years of the conquest. The grandchildren of the men who had burned Iranian cities began patronizing Iranian art, Iranian poetry, and Iranian architecture. Hulagu Khan's grandson Ghazan Khan, a Mongol, became a devout Muslim and made Persian the official language of his court. He funded the rebuilding of cities his grandfather had destroyed. The conquerors had become Iranians. Again. Exactly as it had happened before. Exactly as it would happen again. Iran had barely begun to breathe when the second apocalypse arrived. Timur. Born in 1336 in what is now Uzbekistan. Partly Mongol, partly Turkic. He walked with a limp from a battle wound, earning the Persian name Timur-i-Lang. Timur the Lame. In Europe, Tamerlane. Timur sacked Isfahan in 1387. The city had surrendered. He accepted, then ordered a massacre anyway. 70,000 people killed in a single day. Their skulls stacked into towers around the city walls. He did this not once, but in city after city across Iran, Iraq, Syria, and India. The strangest contradiction, Timur surrounded himself with poets and architects. He built the stunning Registan in Samarkand. He commissioned magnificent mosques. He was simultaneously the greatest patron and greatest destroyer of Islamic civilization in one lifetime. A monster who loved beauty. A builder who built on bones. Timur died in 1405 on his way to conquer China. His empire shattered within years. Iran fell back into chaos, warlords, fragmented provinces, weak rulers. For nearly a century no single power controlled the Iranian plateau. And then, a 14-year-old boy changed everything. In 1501 a young man named Ismail rode into the city of Tabriz at the head of an army of fierce devotees called the Kizilbash, the Redheads, named for their crimson turbans. He was 14 years old. He had been fighting since he was 12. And he had never lost. Ismail founded the Safavid dynasty and unified Iran for the first time since the Arab conquest, 850 years earlier. He did it in 3 years. By 17 he controlled most of the Iranian plateau. Generals 3 times his age followed him without question. Shah Ismail then made a decision that would define Iran for 5 centuries. He declared 12 Shia Islam the official religion of Iran. Every Friday sermon, every school, every court, Shia. It was not simply religion. It was a wall. A boundary. A declaration that Iran was different. The neighboring Ottoman Empire was Sunni. By making Iran officially Shia, Ismail gave his kingdom an identity that the Ottomans could never absorb. Iran was not just a country anymore. It was a distinct civilization with its own version of the faith. Iran had given itself a new reason to exist. The Safavid Empire fought the Ottomans for 2 centuries, a Cold War punctuated by hot battles. At the Battle of Calderon in 1514 the Ottomans brought artillery. Ismail refused to use guns, he considered them dishonorable. The Ottoman cannons destroyed his cavalry. He never led an army again. But the Safavids survived Calderon. They pushed back the Uzbeks in the east. They rebuilt Iranian cities. They patronized art, poetry, and architecture on a scale not seen since Baghdad. Persian miniature painting reached its absolute peak under the Safavid court painters. Shah Abbas I came to power in 1588 at the age of 17. He inherited a kingdom losing on every front. The Ottomans had taken western provinces. The Uzbeks had taken eastern provinces. His own generals were more powerful than him. He spent his first 2 years making peace, so he could fix everything from the inside. Abbas rebuilt the Iranian army from scratch. He created trained musketeers and artillery units loyal personally to him, not to tribal chiefs. Then he moved his capital from Qazvin to a small central city called Isfahan. What he did to that city over the next 40 years was extraordinary. Abbas covered Isfahan in mosques, palaces, gardens, and bazaars. The Great Nakshi Jahan Square, still standing today, is one of the largest public squares ever built in human history. 6 times the size of St. Mark's Square in Venice. It was completed in 1629. Iranians had a saying, Isfahan is half the world. The Imam Mosque on the south side of the square took 18 years to build. 7 million bricks. 500,000 hand-painted tiles. Its dome, covered in turquoise and cobalt blue, is still considered one of the most beautiful structures ever built by human hands. The acoustics inside are perfect. A whisper at one end can be heard at the other. With his new army, Abbas turned on his enemies. He drove the Ottomans out of the western provinces in a campaign of stunning speed. He crushed the Uzbeks in the east and retook the holy city of Mashhad. Then he expelled the Portuguese from the island of Hormuz, opening Iranian trade to the entire world. Abbas invited merchants from England, Holland, Armenia, and India to trade in Isfahan. The city became a cosmopolitan center of global commerce. European travelers who visited wrote home in disbelief. One English ambassador reported seeing goods from China, India, Africa, and Europe all for sale in the same bazaar. He also brought 12,000 Armenian Christian families from the Caucasus and settled them in a purpose-built suburb of Isfahan called New Julfa. They became the city's most successful merchants. Their churches still stand in Isfahan today. A Muslim Persian king built a Christian neighborhood inside his own capital. That is the Iran the world forgot. The Safavid dynasty after Abbas slowly weakened. Later Shahs were pious men, better suited to prayer than war. The empire contracted. The Afghans, a restless eastern province, rose in open rebellion under a chieftain named Mahmud Hotaki. In 1722 Mahmud marched on Isfahan with a small army that no one took seriously. The Safavid Shah Sultan Husain sent armies that were defeated one by one. He ran out of options. He ran out of generals. And finally, he rode out of his own capital to surrender in person. Shah Sultan Husain removed his own turban, the symbol of royal power, and placed it on Mahmud's head on a road outside Isfahan. The dynasty that had unified Iran for 220 years ended not with a battle. It ended with a gentle king handing over his crown to a conqueror he had underestimated. Out of the chaos that followed, one man emerged. His name was Nader. Born around 1688 in Khorasan, the same province that had launched the Abbasid revolution, the same province that had given Iran Ferdowsi and al-Biruni. He was born into poverty. His father was a shepherd and furrier. As a young man, Nader was captured by Uzbek raiders and sold into slavery. He escaped. He joined a local warlord as a soldier. He rose through sheer battlefield genius, winning every engagement he was given. Within years he commanded armies. Within a decade he commanded Iran. Nader drove the Afghans out of Iran completely. He drove the Ottomans back from the western provinces. He repelled a Russian advance in the north. In 7 years he had reassembled the shattered Iranian state from nothing. The grateful Safavid puppet king he served barely noticed, until it was too late. In 1736 Nader convened a great assembly of Iranian nobles and tribal chiefs. He told them the Safavid dynasty was finished. He asked them who should be Shah. The answer, carefully arranged in advance, was unanimous. Nader, a shepherd's son from Khorasan, had talked his way onto the throne of Iran. Nader Shah looked east. The Mughal Empire of India was the richest empire on earth. Its emperors had been accumulating the wealth of Asia for 200 years. Nader used a border dispute as a pretext. In 1739 he crossed the Khyber Pass with his army and descended into India. The Mughal Emperor Muhammad Shah had an army many times larger than Nader's. They met at Karnal, north of Delhi, in February 1739. The battle lasted 3 hours. Nader used artillery and flanking cavalry in combination so perfectly that the massive Mughal army simply fell apart. Muhammad Shah surrendered on the battlefield. Nader rode into Delhi as a guest, not yet a conqueror. Then a riot broke out and Indian soldiers killed some of his men. Nader rode into the city himself, climbed to the roof of a mosque and sat in silence for 3 hours. When he came down, he gave one order: kill. 30,000 people died in Delhi that day. Then Nader stopped the killing as suddenly as he had started it. He loaded 12,000 camels, horses, and elephants with the accumulated wealth of the Mughal Empire and headed home. It took him nearly 2 months just to organize the treasure for transport. Among the treasures taken were the Peacock Throne, the most magnificent royal seat ever built. The Koh-i-Noor, the Sea of Light, one of the largest pink diamonds in the world. It sits today in the Iranian crown jewels in Tehran. And the Koh-i-Noor, the Mountain of Light. The Koh-i-Noor has been soaked in more blood than almost any object on earth. After Nader's death it passed to Afghanistan, then to the Sikh Empire of Punjab, then, after the British conquered Punjab in 1849, to Queen Victoria. It sits today in the Tower of London. India wants it back. Several nations have claims. The diamond itself has no comment. Nader returned to Iran the richest conqueror in the world. He cancelled all taxes for 3 years. Iranians celebrated. But power had changed him. He became paranoid. Suspicious. He had his own son blinded on suspicion of plotting against him. The man who had liberated Iran began terrorizing it. In 1747, 9 years after crowning himself Shah, Nader was assassinated in his tent by his own officers. The greatest Iranian military genius since Cyrus was killed by the men he trusted most. His empire, which had stretched from the Caucasus to Delhi, collapsed within months of his death. After the chaos of Nader's collapse, a kind man rose in the south. Karim Khanzan took power in 1751 and refused to call himself Shah. He called himself Vakil, the representative of the people. He ruled from Shiraz, the city of Hulfes, roses, and poetry. He lowered taxes. He stopped the wars. He let people breathe. Karim Khan is remembered not for what he conquered, but for what he chose not to do. He did not hurt his own people. In a century of monsters that was remarkable enough to make him a legend. His tomb is in Shiraz. People still visit it today and leave flowers for a king who was simply kind. After Karim Khan died in 1779, Iran fell back into civil war. The Qajar dynasty eventually emerged victorious and unified Iran by 1794 under a brutal ruler named Aga Mohammad Khan. He reconquered the Caucasus provinces. He blinded 20,000 men in Kerman as punishment for defiance. Then his own servant stabbed him in his sleep. The Qajars who followed were weaker men, and the world around Iran was growing terrifyingly stronger. Russia was industrializing and expanding south. Britain had consolidated India and was expanding north. Iran was caught in the middle, between two industrial empires, with an army still fighting with muskets and cavalry. The Russo-Persian Wars of the early 1800s were a humiliation. Iran lost them both. The Treaty of Gulistan in 1813 forced Iran to surrender the entire Caucasus, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. Lands that had been part of the Iranian cultural world for 2,000 years. Gone. Signed away at a table because the Iranian army could not compete with Russian rifles and artillery. Britain and Russia then turned Iran into a chessboard. British companies received monopolies over Iranian tobacco, banking, and trade. Russian merchants operated outside Iranian law. The Qajar Shahs signed these agreements because they had no leverage. They were not weak men, they were trapped men. And the Iranian people were watching. In 1890, Nasser al-Din Shah gave a British company a complete monopoly over all Iranian tobacco, production, sale, and export. Every Iranian farmer who grew tobacco. Every merchant who sold it. Overnight, working for a British company. The Iranian people responded with something the Shah did not expect. A religious decree went out: do not smoke until the concession is cancelled. Overnight, across the entire country, Iranians stopped. The bazaars closed their tobacco stalls. The hookahs went cold. Even in the Shah's own household, his wives stopped smoking. The British company had a monopoly over a product nobody was buying. Within months, the Shah cancelled the concession. The Iranian people had beaten a king and a British corporation with nothing but collective refusal. No army. No weapons. Just a shared decision to say no. It was the first mass civil disobedience movement in Iranian history. The memory of it did not fade. In 1906, that memory became a revolution. Ordinary Iranians, merchants, clerics, intellectuals, and women rose up and demanded a constitution. A parliament. The rule of law. The Qajar Shah agreed. Iran became one of the first countries in Asia to have a written constitution and an elected parliament. It happened before China. Before Turkey. Before India. Iran, ancient, invaded, exhausted Iran, was at the forefront of democratic revolution in Asia in 1906. A people who had survived everything were now demanding the right to govern themselves. They had earned it 1,000 times over. But Iran's democracy would not be allowed to breathe for long. The same powers that had stripped Iran of its resources, Britain and Russia, moved immediately to undermine the new parliament. The constitutional revolution was strangled before it could stand. That story, the most heartbreaking chapter in all of Iranian history, is part 3. In 1908, 2 years after the constitution was signed, a British engineer drilling in southwest Iran hit something that would change the entire 20th century. Oil. The most valuable substance on earth. Sitting under Iranian soil in quantities that made men's eyes widen. From that moment, Iran never had peace again. Britain would own Iran's oil for 40 years. America would overthrow Iran's democratically elected prime minister in 1953, and admit it 50 years later. A revolution in 1979 would shock the entire world. A war with Iraq would kill 1 million people. And through all of it, the poetry would survive. The language would survive. The people would survive. 3,000 years of Iran. And we are not finished yet. If this video opened your eyes, share it. The world has been taught a version of history that left Iran out. Every view, every share is a small act of correction. Part 3 is coming. And it explains the world you are living in right now. Disclaimer: the information presented in this video has been researched and compiled from multiple historical sources including books, academic papers, encyclopedias, and historical records. Persian and Iranian history spans 3,000 years and is among the most researched and debated fields in world history. Different historians and sources may present varying accounts, interpretations, and assessments of the same events. Dates for ancient events are approximate and subject to ongoing scholarly revision. We have endeavored to present an accurate, balanced, and engaging account of this extraordinary history. We do not claim this to be the definitive version of events. Viewers are strongly encouraged to explore multiple sources and form their own informed opinions. This video is intended purely for educational and informational purposes. The history class respects all cultures, religions, and peoples featured in this series.